And so art is our humanity, and music is an expression of that. It expresses the inexpressible. While that might not be saving somebody's life, it is life. And we need to show that, and we need to move the needle on that. Otherwise, our society is one-dimensional.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from honestypill.com. You're listening to episode 33 of the Honesty Pill podcast. This season on the show, I'll be talking to people who are breaking the status quo, ditching outdated traditions, and building a better future for themselves and the people they work with. I'll be connecting you with musicians, sound healers, coaches, hip-hop artists, actors, big-time New York City contract negotiators, and people who not only inspire and educate every single day, but who are experts at talking about what they do so you can get inspired in your own work. My guest today is the E-flat clarinetist of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra in New York, Jessica Phillips. We're going to talk about her performance career, auditions, and how she ended up playing in one of the most regarded opera orchestras in the world. But Jessica has a lot more going on in her life than just playing the clarinet. We're going to dig into her life as an educator, musician, entrepreneur, and advocate for the arts. We're also going to dig into what goes on behind the scenes in negotiating a contract for one of the world's top musical organizations, the Metropolitan Orchestra in New York City. Okay, let's jump into my conversation with Jessica Phillips right now. So one of the themes I work with a lot at Honesty Pill Mission Control is the idea that you are not solely defined by your instrument and that you can do other things in your life while still achieving a high level of success as a performing musician. My guest today is a brilliant example of exactly how to live that life. Welcome to the podcast, Jessica Phillips.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this will be great. We've been sort of orbiting each other's communities here for a while now, and especially during the pandemic, getting to hear each other speak in different areas. So I have so many questions for you because I feel like we both have the same job being orchestral musicians, but I also feel like what you do is worlds apart from my daily experience as an opera orchestra musician. We're going to get into those differences in a bit, but I wanted to talk about your background a little bit. Did you grow up in a household that was full of music?
No, not at all. My dad's an accountant. My mom's a lawyer. My stepdad's a lawyer, and he builds furniture, and so nobody.
You went to NEC, didn't you?
I did my youth orchestra stuff there.
Right.
So I started in GYPSO, which is now BYSO.
I am sure that I've done coachings for GYPSO when I was doing my master's at NEC. Oh, that's great. So how did you get started on the clarinet since you didn't have a lot of music in the house growing up?
My mom decided that, for summer, I would go to this summer camp in South Jersey, and a part of it was kind of like a summer arts camp. And a part of that, you could choose to act, to sing, or play an instrument. And I was already good at the recorder and the ukulele, in second grade. So I wanted to play an instrument. I didn't know which one. And in discussions with my grandfather, he was a huge Benny Goodman fan. So it was like, you should play the clarinet. And that camp provided the instrument and everything. So I think that was my start, kind of second grade. And then I loved it. And I started taking private lessons in fourth grade. My family moved to Boston in fifth grade, and that's where I auditioned for GYPSO. And I got in, I think that year, it was in sixth grade. And so I was like a very young wind player there who had no idea what the heck was going on, Yeah. And I did NEC Youth Philharmonic and went on tour with them my senior year of high school, which was an amazing experience too, because doing both was incredible. And Benjamin Zander was...
Oh, we could do a whole podcast just talking about Ben Zander. Wait, so hang on, back up a second. Your grandfather was a Benny Goodman fan, mm-hmm. and you had just come off of actually similar background to me, learning the recorder, which all of our peers learned the recorder. I don't know if that's a thing anymore.
Yeah.
But he said you should play the clarinet.
Yes. He was like the licorice stick, is it? He would listen to, records, remember those, and... And he was a World War II vet, and he had been shot down over northern Italy, and therefore was handicapped in his left leg. He kind of lost his knee and always had a limp, but he could do a dance, and so he would do this straight-legged, left leg dance to Benny Goodman, and it just made him so happy. And So yeah, it was really, and I'm Jessica Jordan Phillips. He's Stanley Jordan, so I was named after him. So I had great love for him, and we had a really wonderful relationship. So that was kind of all I needed was like, okay, if you think I should do it, I'll do it. And yeah, I mean, in Colorado, we had music class. We played recorder. We learned how to read music. We played the ukulele, and like the little xylophone. I really don't think that exists anymore, which is, I'm sure we're going to get into it, but like that's now, maybe is it our responsibility to society, to provide that? There are a lot of arguments pro and con for that, but it certainly exposed me to music when I wouldn't have otherwise been. So it really did change my life, that class.
I think it's important to, and we can talk about this for sure, expose kids to something that doesn't have a screen or required to be plugged in to balance all the great things. I recently heard that learning how to code, website coding, can stimulate similar regions of the brain as learning how to play the piano,
Yeah.
which I was shocked to hear that. And I thought that's fantastic. What another venue to develop all those soft skills that you have as a musician. Having those screens, especially over the past 2 years, I am, it's screen fatigue big time. I want to actually jump ahead and talk about your education for a minute, because you didn't actually major in music in your undergraduate studies. You were a political science major. Why did you choose that degree? Were you thinking of becoming a diplomat or a lawyer? What happened there?
I auditioned for all of the conservatories and got into Eastman and NEC and Northwestern, and really had to consider what it is I thought I was capable of doing in a career in music. And to me at the time, my whole life revolved around all of my music activities. All of my friends, who were still friends to this day, were there. I just wasn't sure I could do it, really. I didn't know what it meant to have a career in music. And I knew I wanted to be in New York. And I knew that I really did want to get a liberal arts education. And I originally was just more interested in history, I think, again, from my grandfather. But in taking one history course, it's like so broad. And I luckily had a professor who was the head of the political science department at Barnard, which is really strong. And he kind of pushed me in that direction. And it's not necessarily, although, man, would I love to be a diplomat? Like, besides a race car driver and a spy, like that, yes, for sure. Another dream job.
Well, I think those skills are all related, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
perfect.
There's something in there, yeah, like James Bond. But
Yep.
it's like about statistics and demographics and narratives and dialogue, and a lot of that is involved in those classes. And that's what I really gravitated to. It can get translated into marketing language, like behavioral psychology and, marketing research, and how people are perceiving what you're saying, and how we know in this country we're having a really big challenge in hearing and listening to each other, and this kind of deepening political divide. So at that time, it was really interesting to me, but it was also the least amount of credits to finish my degree. And by the time I was a sophomore, somebody had given me a ticket to the Met Opera. In fact, Jen Montone got a ticket from Julie Landsman, which came to me via Dave Gordon. And right. And I went to see Andre Chenier, and Pavarotti was singing. And if you don't know the opera, he comes out in this huge party scene of, wigs, all the operatic things. But when he walked out, the whole audience was like, it was so electric and exciting. It was my first like real show in New York to see. And that's where I heard Ricardo Morales play clarinet. And I just was like, I have to study with him. And this is it, this is all I want to do is be a musician. So then I was sort of in a hurry to finish my degree. And I basically was a music minor. I just didn't ever have time to pass piano proficiency. So therefore, I'm not a music major. And, New York, it's like, where are you going to find pianos? There's not a bazillion practice rooms around and apartments. And so I just kind of gave up on that. And I graduated a half semester early so that I could focus on practicing and taking lessons with David Weber, who was a tremendous influence on my playing. And at the time to graduate, I had to write a dissertation and a political theory paper, which was focused and sort of relevant today on Kosovo and why that region had exploded and the historical relationships between all of the nation building ideas there and the nationalism there and what really had been going on with Milosevic. And nobody had really been talking about it. It was a really difficult paper, but it was incredibly gratifying to study that kind of political conflict. And I think it set me up for all of the things to come in my life. And it's a very big deal at Barnard. It's a very big research paper. So it's like a 40-page paper and you have to do it to graduate. So, I was doing that and playing clarinet and, and soaking up everything New York has to offer, which is, is amazing.
Did the people in your sort of political science sphere, you're writing these papers, when the subject of clarinet came up, did they look at you like, wait, what? You do what?
Yes. I think so. I mean, I took a phenomenal art history course. That was a year-long course. And in my study group was a girl who was going to she went to American Ballet Theater High School. She was a dancer. So in that class, there was more of, the art and culture aspect, instruments, singer, dancer. But I was definitely weird.
Yeah, we're all a little bit weird. I want to talk about opera for a second. Mm-hmm. You play with one of the most storied historical opera orchestras that exists. What makes opera unique, or what makes opera musicians unique? What's the difference between the pit and a symphony orchestra experience?
That's such a great question. And it's one that I get all the time. And yet I always love that question. And for me, it's sort of an easy answer with three different components. One, we're in the pit. So we're not on stage. We're not in the spotlight. And what that does is facilitate community. There's all kinds of conversations and reactions that are happening during the show that probably wouldn't happen on stage. So in the repetition of repertoire and the amount of singers that come through that building and on that stage, if you had to blindfold me, I could tell you probably 15 different tenors because I don't see the stage. I'm looking at the audience. Unfortunately, I have the worst seat in the entire house. But there's so much, that's the second part. There's so much listening happening that the flexibility that we have in understanding when a singer is going to take a breath or they're rushing like crazy because they're running across the stage. So we got to go with that. That split second, no, they're going to come to us, or no, we're going to have to catch up to them. And when the organism that is the pit orchestra kind of knows what to do, it's really an amazing moment to see that happen. And I think that the third thing, at least about the Met, is that we do get some symphonic opportunities and chamber music opportunities, which I think really inform our playing and how the listening informs how we blend. And so we're always hearing voice and how they're creating phrases. And so we tend to do that the same. And the most simple, basic example I can give you on clarinet is that there are people who will play Debussy Rhapsody and they'll circular breathe through it, And for me, I'm like, a singer will always take a breath. It's just not natural to not take a breath. You can always make a breath musical because that's how, singers do it. And so this, same kinds of like, fireworks of Rigoletto or any bel canto opera, they're going to have to take a breath somewhere. So I think that's kind of the difference, is that our phrasing is a little bit more organic and more trained by the human voice. Also, there's drama in that. There is some color or story that is informing what we're doing. And the kind of the best story I can give you of that is when Yannick Nézet-Séguin, our music director, who wasn't at the time, we were playing Faust and I was acting principal, and there's this like big clarinet cadenza and I played it. And he's like, you're just such a happy person and I see you all the time, but this is a really sad moment. Like it's way too happy. Can you please make it more sad? And I had to like really think about that, I hadn't played principal on it before, and I had to really start to think about color and the drama in the phrase. And I think that's what sets us. Those are the things that set us apart. Besides just it takes forever for somebody to die so that we can go home. The soprano never dies.
It's funny that you mentioned the voice and the impact that, you're working with the greatest singers in the world every night. And that is precisely the thing that most orchestral coaches that I work with, and certainly the work that I do, is to try and connect instrumentalists back to their voice. And I'm not a great singer, but I have people sing things because it connects viscerally to your body. And also, it just gets rid of all the technical things that we get wrapped up in. The whole point of what we're doing is connecting with people. I'll be quite honest with you. I have always been so intrigued of having an opera orchestra job. I've thought of auditioning for the Met just because I wanted to be a part of that. But the thing I can't wrap my head around, Jessica, is the hours that you guys spend in the chair. So for people who aren't aware, a typical orchestra concert for the LA Phil, for example, New York Philharmonic, is 2, maybe 2.5 hours maximum. And that's a long night. What's a typical opera length for you at the Met?
3 hours, 10 minutes, pretty much. That's the average. But this week, this past week, next week, and the week after, we're doing Don Carlos, which is 4 hours and 45 minutes. It's insane. And, doing the ring cycle, Götterdämmerung is just under 6. Valkyrie and Siegfried are around 5 and 4. Rheingold is short. It's 2 hours, 45 minutes with no intermission. And we're doing Electra right now, which is also short, no intermission. So those happen infrequently. But generally all the Puccini's, 3 hours, 15 minutes. We're also doing Marriage of Figaro right now. That's a little bit longer. It's probably like 3 hours, 35 minutes, depending on the conductor. So yeah, it's much, much longer. Contractually, in our week, we're required to do 4 shows. So there's 7 shows a week, Monday through Saturday. Let's just say 2 shows on Saturday, matinee. And now we're flex either Sunday or a Monday. This was negotiated by our committee, me, in 2018. So we now perform on some Sundays. And, but Broadway does too. Then the rehearsals are sort of the week before, 2 weeks before preparation for the rotation of shows that are coming in. So right now I'm doing Tosca tonight, Don Carlos tomorrow. We're doing their Ukrainian benefit concert on Monday night. Tuesday would be Rotolinda, no clarinets, and then Ariadne is running. Then back to Don Carlos. We're rehearsing Eugene Onegin, and then that will start the week after. So, and one other opera, Figaro. There's always a rotation of several operas. We don't do the same opera at the same time, all for like a month. We're not a festival house, we're a repertory house. So there's the logistics behind the Met Opera are just incredible. And one of the greatest adventures and privileges for me being on the committee for so long and doing 2 negotiations was to see all of that behind the scenes action. You can walk backstage and there's, 20 stagehands who all know where everything is. There's a set for tomorrow night on stage left. There's something that's preset in the back. There's a wagon on stage, right. And the whole thing is like every piece and prop is somewhere that they know where it is. And then they're putting it all together in the afternoon after the rehearsal in the morning is over. So it's quite an extensive production. Opera is expensive. The thing about the Met is it has such a long, storied history, and there are so many people that have been there for 40 years, like in props and, the carpenters and in the costume department, and of course in the musicians and the orchestra too, so people really stayed there. It was a very good job for a very long time. And even though the hours are long, I think you have to really like opera to stay. Yeah. And it takes a toll on your body, for sure.
It'd probably be good to like opera if you're a carpenter for 40 years at the Met. Has there ever been any like disasters where, some carriage or wheelbarrow was left on stage when it wasn't supposed to? Like what happened? What was that like?
I mean, what haven't we encountered? That's a whole bloopers at the Met podcast. I mean, see what's happening on stage, but I've certainly, a lot of our bloopers are animals. So there's a carriage that's like, a horse drawn carriage for a singer to come into the scene, and the horse bucks and starts to come. One time during a Cavalleria Rusticana, it started to come towards the prompter box, and the conductor is like, oh my God, freaking out. We've had, hat boxes thrown into the pit that hit us. We had, I think it was in Tristan, he's on a sled, and the sled broke, and he came careening down and almost hit the prompt box, which stopped it, thank gosh. But that's one time where we did have to stop the opera. And we had somebody fall in the pit during War and Peace with Gergiev conducting. That was the only other time in my 20 years that I've seen us stop because of a huge malfunction. But like, we've had lights accidentally catch on fire, and like a stage guy will come out like with a pack and just kind of like put it out, and then or they'll make an announcement. And it's always, to me, that's like the best part of it all, is like all that stuff that happens and watching the faces. And of course, like I said, we're always reacting, so there's always little things that are happening and we're laughing, or the orchestra has a bunch of little funny things that we do in certain operas. And Rosenkavalier, we all sing during this like drunk moment, and those are the kind of fun, also the fun little like habits that we have.
It's sort of like we all do fake fireworks during the 1812 overture.
Yes.
Even if we're not at the Hollywood Bowl. Oh, that's great. Speaking of animals on stage, is it true that there are stables and things down in the bowels of the Met?
No. We have, the animals, as far as I know, are part of a union. Like their animal handlers have to be, we're a total union house, and New York is New York. You said Broadway, Lincoln Center, Carnegie. But that also means we have a really, really strong union. So you cannot do anything in New York without the union, pretty much in this area, not jazz. So the animal handlers we have Gabriel the donkey, for example, and he comes in from a specific entrance on Amsterdam Avenue. And there's like, in Rosenkavalier, I think there were like 2 wolfhounds that came in, and we have a horse, and the handlers are there the whole time. And so we don't keep them on site. I guess maybe you guys would have it more than we do, like animals that are for film specifically, and like people care for them and then they're brought in it's like that.
I'm stuck on this topic because it's just so mystical to me. Do you have a kitchen or a lounge? Because talking about the length of the operas, you have people coming in from outside New York, right? People living in Jersey or in Long Island, maybe. I don't know where. There's snow, there's transportation, there's bridges. So you really are living in the building, right?
Yeah. So this is one of my biggest pet peeves, and I'm going to make it quick, but we do have a cafeteria, and then we have a musician's lounge, and every group, and we have 16 different like unions in the house, and all of those groups represent something that's happening backstage, or ushers and security men, and security guards, I should say, because there are several women, and they all have individual lounges. So everybody has their space, their locker. The chorus has like a little like dressing room table, dancers, all that stuff. And then the cafeteria is for everybody. My biggest pet peeve, though, is for our audience. There isn't, like, I wish we could be like Europe and have a little bit more of like the bar in the lounge where you could go prior to the show for our audience. I feel like that is something that we are a little bit behind on. And I wish we could do more of that, because I think people want to do that. I think what we know from marketing research is that people want community. The reason why they're going is they want community. They want to be moved, like you said. They want to feel something, and they want community. They want to go with their friends. So we've started to stagger our shows from a long time ago from 8:00 almost all the time, except if it was long opera, to like 7:30, 8:00 on Fridays, so that people might go out for dinner first and then come to the show. They want to stay later because it's a weekend. We've been trying to experiment with accommodating that kind of part of it is that like that community experience over drinks, and Europe has that down. We don't. I mean, you guys have that. You have that in the hall.
Yeah, but what your point is well taken, though, that we are behind in the experience of consuming the art. I want to talk about that later too. It has been tradition to you show up, you sit in a little uncomfortable chair in silence, and you don't clap at the wrong time, and that is so changing. Our industry is changing. God, I want to move because I have to ask you about this because I'm a section player. What is sort of the difference for you leading versus playing in the section? What do you prefer? What do you think the skill sets are overlapping on those things?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question, and it's so nuanced in some ways, but it's also very basic in other ways. So I've played almost 25% of my career as acting principal, so maybe 5 or 6 seasons now, and I'm doing it right now as well. So this is very fresh, and I can answer it very easily. The Met is a huge hall. We have 3,500 seats. So one of the biggest differences is just literally the capacity of my sound and like how I'm projecting. And it takes me like maybe a month or so to build that up, reads and just kind of strength. Whereas on second, I'm not so worried about that. I'm worried about the aura of the sound of the section. I'm trying to create the basic fundamental tone color, and then the principal can fit into that or feel comfortable. That's in terms of sound. I feel like my job as the principal is to interact with the concertmaster, to interact with the principal winds, to decide how we're going to phrase what the dynamic level will be. And then the second's job is to do that with me and to kind of know what I'm going to do because I'm telegraphing it, right? Musically, I'm being organic enough for them to know, oh, you're crescendoing here, I'll crescendo too, but just under you. And oh, we're diminuendoing. Oh, we're going to take time. Okay, I'm going to follow you. And so my job is to make those decisions as principal. And on second, my job is to intuit those moments. Sometimes that's as basic as, like I said, just a retard here, or here's how we're going to do this eighth note, da da, And but the things on second that I worry about, I don't know about you, but I worry about attacks so much on second. Like it's just like it has to be so precise. And on principal, I'm like, I come in, it's your job to, figure out when I'm going to come in. And that's a relief, I love both. I'm a very collaborative person. And if I'm part of a team that's functional and having a good time, which I have been lucky enough in my entire career at the Met for 20 years to be in a section that is amazing players, amazing people, the best bass clarinet player in the world, may he rest in peace, James Onyebeni, who just was an amazing person all around and funniest person ever. So, I mean, I've been very lucky in that when I'm playing second, yeah, I feel like I'm part of something great. And I love doing that. I love collaborating like that. Playing principal is a challenge. I also I like stepping into that role. I like being the creative voice. I get a lot of joy from it that doesn't always happen in the same way on second.
I feel like the best section players that I've encountered have had some principal experience because they kind of know what it is that their principals need. Absolutely. And I know what it feels like to sit there. And I'm a little different than you in that I have like no desire to play principal at all. And I didn't realize that. It was a shock for me to figure that out. I love playing second. I love that synergy that I can create with my sound, with the articulations, with the balance, but also just the energy. And I also am lucky to have a section that is super competent, super collaborative. And, I think we constantly lift each other up every single week, which is required because the job is so damn hard.
Yeah.
There's no time for drama and there's no time for anybody not to show up prepared and ready to throw down. Can I ask you about preparing? Because there are people listening to this podcast who are really interested in auditions. And I had prepared, I'd say 80% of my audition experience was with symphonic repertoire that I'd been practicing since I was in college and ingraining all those bad habits. What's the difference between preparing opera rep and symphonic rep? Or is there a difference?
Oh, no, total difference. And for me, I always tell everyone The reason why I won the Met job is because I prepared a list of new music that didn't have all the old bad habits built into it.
Yep.
So, and we know this from, talent code and all of these things, neuroplasticity, deliberate practice, whatever. If you're not thinking about how you learn and how your brain learns, you're missing a huge part of how to efficiently practice. So if you've learned something wrong, it takes a great effort to unlearn it because literally the myelin fiber has to get broken. And so like when I approach Mendelssohn Scherzo, I literally have to start over at the beginning and remind myself the way I'm supposed to do it, not the way I initially want to do it, which is wrong. But when I learned the opera rep, it was like, oh my gosh, this like I'm really competent. I'm not having all of these old problems. And that was a huge eye opener for me and a really big boost of confidence because like I could do the articulation. I just had these bad habits with Mendelssohn scherzos. So I highly recommend. I use opera excerpts and also we don't learn them in school. Like they don't teach opera excerpts very much. So when with my studio, if a student of mine is having problems with Mendelssohn Scherzo or articulation, I will give them a similar articulation exercise from opera, Rossini, Barbara Seville, Italian Vespers, like anything. And they can usually do it just because it's something different. And that gets them to figure out what the actual mechanism is for that articulation. And then they can apply it, but it's still like they have to unlearn first. There's just no way around that.
It's exactly my experience that it was all brand new. All my baggage was left behind. It was actually kind of refreshing. Unfortunately, the challenge there, though, is you've got to wade through a 5-hour opera to find 3 measures of music. And maybe now, with YouTube and scores available online, it's easier. But back when we were preparing, it was really challenging to just find the music.
Oh, totally. I mean, for students now, where they can just type in, Mimi, your little hand is frozen, from La Boheme into YouTube, and they get to that aria, that's something you and I never had. I didn't have any access to recordings or scores when I was preparing. So the access to music is enormous. Of course, in my entrepreneurship class, I'm saying, that music is free.
Yeah.
You are not paying for that, but it is an enormous resource. And, I also just think that just the exposure to opera is really good, again, for that singing, that human voice thing. So, I mean, I really encourage it as a tool all the way around, no matter what.
Well, this is a great segue into talking about another major lobe of your brain and things that you're working on. In 2020, right around the same time I got serious with my coaching as well, you co-founded K&P Strategy, a consulting business helping clients all over the country build brands, online presence through strategic and innovative content creation in digital media, something I've been trying to get musicians to understand. What you do is so interesting visually. It's interesting conceptually. It's just so interesting to everyone. It is so easy to take a day in the life of you, musician, and chop it up into things that can be then used to market and educate in this space. And you also teach entrepreneurship at the Manhattan School of Music as part of their orchestral performance program and at the Juilliard School. So here's my question. What would you say, and I can't wait to hear your answer to this because I know what mine is, what is the biggest challenge or problem that you solve for musicians who are stepping into this space?
That's a big question. So what we did in K&P Strategy, my partner, Miran Kim, who's a violinist in the orchestra, is really a brilliant graphic and visual artist. And she and I had worked on the committee together, and we were the ones that kind of started Met Orchestra Musicians Instagram account. And what we found is that the musicians in the orchestra in general were not very prepared, as you said, to understand the value of their content. And when we started to say, like, yeah, we want to know how you get ready for work or whatever, behind the scenes, these little things, because what we started to see is that that content did really well on Instagram, different content on Facebook, different things on Twitter. And that was of value. It was huge. And we grew the Instagram account. I think she and I stopped doing it during the beginning of COVID, but at the time we left, we built that account to like 17,000 in Instagram and, 15,000 people on Facebook and all this stuff. So it really, people do want to know that stuff. And I think that, like you said, the small little seat, that the traditional don't clap in the wrong places, that was the view even from the musicians. And we started saying, no, there's what we're seeing anecdotally. And then we got the marketing research data to back it up, is that no, our audiences want an intimate experience. And sometimes that touch point of intimacy is knowing what happens behind the scenes, behind the curtain, how you live your life. People don't know anything about it. And so first it was just content, but then it was sort of like, do we have a responsibility to kind of educate society about the importance of art? And when COVID happened, we were furloughed. The Met is a huge organization. So that's a lot of people out of work. So we created K&P Strategy as a way to kind of make some money. But what we found is we were just having conversations with people all over the country who had no idea how to pivot to the digital space and no idea how to think about what their content would be. And so like we called it innovative, and really it was like, just be you, like literally that was so many of our conversations. It's like, that's interesting. If it's authentic content, it will do well. Will it go viral? That's not a goal. No. What you want is authentic content that is interacting with quality followers. And so the numbers don't necessarily matter. It's the interaction points that you're getting and that quality intersection with your community, essentially. And I think it's the thing that I focus on a lot in my classes, because, what you were like when you were 20, it was like you were single-mindedly focused on winning a job. And that's where these students are. And I'm not saying that that's not going to happen for them, but the statistics of that happening for all of them are low. But even if they do succeed, what I want them to do is really to be, and Juilliard calls it a citizen artist. I started at MSM first, and I really thought of it more of an arts ambassador. That's the diplomacy. So, you have to go and be an ambassador for the arts and why it's important. And when COVID happened, we saw that, yes, we were clapping at 7:00 for healthcare workers, absolutely. But people were also on Instagram and all their social media outlets watching music and being really moved by music when they had nowhere else to go during lockdown. And so art is our humanity, and music is an expression of that. It expresses the inexpressible. While that might not be saving somebody's life, it is life. And we need to show that, and we need to move the needle on that. Otherwise, our society is one-dimensional.
And we'll be right back. I want to give a huge thanks to the sponsor of the Honesty Pill podcast, Yamaha Corporation of America. I've been playing Yamaha equipment for decades in my own practice room, on stage with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, or touring all over the world, and Yamaha has been an absolute game changer. Something I love about Yamaha is the way they pursue excellence in all of their work and at all levels. They are as dedicated to bringing quality work for beginning students as they are for marquee artists. I admire their commitment to continuous improvement and creating a community that includes all of the musicians they serve. Make every note count, play Yamaha. Hey everybody, one more thing before we get back to the show. I have sitting behind me on my bookshelf tons of books that I have read over the years as I was preparing for auditions. Books on sports psychology, books on developing good habits, books on improving your mindset, and books that are just awesome reading material to help you navigate a life in the arts. If you'd like a copy of my Audition Accelerator recommended reading for auditioners PDF sent right to your inbox, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to honestypill.com/subscribe, and you're going to put your name and your email in there, and I'm going to send you this list immediately. That's it. You can print it off, stick it to the wall next to your toothbrush. Then, as a subscriber, you will get emails from me now and then, and I promise I don't email too much, with amazing information, thoughts, announcements, offers, totally keeping you in the Honesty Pill mission control loop. So become a subscriber right now to get the book list and go to honestypill.com/subscribe. I'll see you inside. Okay, let's get back to the show. Okay, this is such an important conversation because it is our job to go outside and drag people in and say, no, 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 this is for you. And here is why this matters to you. And I don't think that is being taught as much as it could be. It's certainly not a core part. I'm loving to hear about the programs in Manhattan and at Juilliard because I think they need to be almost emphasized more than the excerpts or even how to play your instrument.
Absolutely. And I like always cringe when I hear Lincoln Center and the word elite in there, because that is true and that is the perception. And if I could have two marketing jobs in my life, one would be to rebrand unions and the other would be to rebrand arts institutions as elite. And I don't know why those happen, but the perception is there, and we have so much work to do. And even in 2014, when we were negotiating, the conversation around it was community outreach. And now the conversation's community engagement. And now the conversation, even like as of this summer, is civic impact. It's just a much more nuanced conversation about how we create a place of belonging for everybody. And certainly part of that is who you see on the stage, who's working behind the scenes, the diversity and inclusion aspect of it. But it's also what we're programming and doing it in an authentic way, which, the Met did Fire Shut Up in My Bones, which was a tremendous achievement. Were there other Black operatic composers that we could have put on the stage before this year? Absolutely. Why didn't that happen? We all know, but who made those decisions not to do it? So it's about completely reframing the idea that it is an elite institution. And unfortunately, what I say in my class is that nonprofits are run by a board, and that board is beholden to usually a department of fundraisers. And so we are beholden to how much money we can raise. And there's always this fear of pissing off all of our biggest donors. But there are other donors out there, and it's like Obama's campaign, you don't need the $10 million donor if you've got 100 people who are going to give $1,000 or something like that. My decimal point might be off there, but that's the thing. And so to me, to make it, like you say, where we're also going into those communities and we're doing chamber concerts there. We have a new program with Carnegie where we do a chamber concert, but then we also do that concert again as part of Carnegie Hall's neighborhood concert series. And those are in like the Bronx and Brooklyn and wherever their partnerships are. That's equally as important, right? Because that's the access that we talked about in the beginning of our conversation, right? Those students are not getting the recorder class. And so especially right now, and here's my political science brain, when we're seeing the war in Ukraine and we're saying, no, Georgiev, you cannot come here because you are complicit. It's the same thing. If you are not adding this community engagement, civic impact to your portfolio as an artist, then you are complicit in keeping organizations elite. And that's the death of art, in my opinion. Art is for people. So, that's my feeling on it. I feel really strongly about it. But I've also spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I've also been very privileged to be a white woman who grew up in a fairly okay household, didn't really need a scholarship to go to college. I went to an expensive liberal arts education. So I come from privilege. And that part of it is seeing that. And then, okay, how can we bring that to, how can I bring what I have to serve my community? And for me, that's initially how I got involved in the committee and kind of serving my orchestra, which led me to like, oh, there is so much more here. And it's hard for students to see that. They don't really understand it. And the thing that I love about teaching these two classes, and at Juilliard, it's a new class. We're still kind of designing it and figuring out what we want to do with it. But I think what's powerful for the students is that I'm a musician. I'm a working musician. I'm there. And all of the guests that I bring in are working musicians who are entrepreneurs. So, like, one of my favorite examples is Elizabeth Rowe, right? So she is such a beautiful entrepreneur who's filling a niche of the young professionals who need help with tenure. And she's also a coach, and she's principal flute in the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and she is not complete without that entrepreneurial part of her life. And that is the definition of entrepreneurship, is the uniqueness you bring as a musician in the world, and then how you want to develop your business. And I know Kaylee Miller, who is a yoga practitioner on top of being a violist freelancer in Seattle and Portland. So it's those are the guests that I bring in for the students, so that they also see, and I think that's the same thing as representation matters. So they see these incredible musicians who do a ton of things, and they get to really talk to them about that. And I think sometimes they're overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, but they're really grateful for that experience. And it all of a sudden their mind is three-dimensional. They're living in a box that has more space in it for them to grow, to really grow into. And I think the last thing I would say about that is that they've been told one thing their whole entire life. And the Gen Z generation, they kind of want work-life balance. They don't want to be in a toxic culture. Things that were acceptable to us. I was the first woman in the clarinet section. I definitely had many not okay experiences. Those are not acceptable to this generation. And so I have kind of hope for them in terms of their ability to change culture and the way that they want to live their lives. They want to be fulfilled. They want to have a full dimensional, holistic life. They don't want to work in one area as like, I'm just going to work 1,000 hours on my instrument. They want to do yoga. They want to do other things. And so they do have an interest in having that kind of life.
It's inspiring for the future that this generation is growing up wanting to expand inside that box that you mentioned. Do you work with any colleagues or people who are not, up and comers? Because here's a question for you. I have noticed some of the colleagues that I've worked with who are my peers, they kind of have a conflict in that there are two parts of their personality. There's the part that loves their full-time job and the fact that there's all this mechanism supporting them. And then the other part that sees an opportunity to become, more outspoken in an advocacy sense and to create their own things and to become more active in the entrepreneurial space. But that also requires you to go from being the top big fish, best in your field, down to how do I post an Instagram reel again? Like, it takes a lot of bravery to sort of have both of those personalities going at the same time. And I think it holds some of them back in realizing that they have a role to play in this space.
Absolutely. Anytime you are at the level, of music making that our colleagues are, anytime they start something new and don't feel competent, there's kind of like, what you know, and what you don't know, and then you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you know. So there's those four areas, and that's a very uncomfortable space for people who do know what they know and what they're capable of, and are perfectionists like our colleagues and as musicians have to be. So with KMP strategy, we had so many conversations about that. Yes, we would teach them how to do certain things. We would build websites that were on Squarespace. Maybe not a ton of bells and whistles, but they can update it themselves. So like, we don't want to do that. My first website, I don't even remember the developer who did it, right? So it's just, we wanted to make it partly coaching. And yeah, so we would talk about the algorithm, like why you should be doing reels in the first place, because Instagram is competing with TikTok and they're gonna the algorithm, so we certainly did a lot of that in with our clients. And we sort of morphed into some of it, and maybe that's my part of it, is like right now we're doing kind of a strategic marketing audit for a nonprofit in Philadelphia. And some of the stuff is all interwoven, marketing and development. And I do think that organization design in general is changing for many artists and arts organizations, because the marketing team needs to be talking to the fundraising team, and the board needs to be really involved. Michael Kaiser would call this the virtuous circle, right? Where everybody has to be on board. And in terms of our colleagues and what they bring to the organization, I've seen colleagues who don't want to do anything, but everybody brings something, and so it's about finding that thing that they can do. So if they can't do reels, like maybe they have some other kooky idea, but it's all about being creative and joyful and fun. Like it shouldn't be like, this is what you have to be perfect at.
I think a good takeaway too for people who are feeling conflicted or uncomfortable about whether or not this is for you, consider whether this is your true self speaking or your freaked out subconscious that you're just trying something new.
Totally.
Because that can really derail the creative process when you're stepping into something new. And I've also said, remember what it was like when you started out on your instrument. The first time you made an oboe reed or figured out how to hold a flute and head joint, whatever. It felt just as horrible as you stepping in front of that camera for IG or whatever. Yeah, I think we have so much in common with how we work with our clients in that space too. I also built my first website myself on WordPress. It was a nightmare. It took me a year to do it. I must say I'm pretty proud of the website I built, but we do all Squarespace now because it's just, you don't need all those bells and whistles to do the type of work we're talking about. Okay, I have to move on to this topic. This is one of the main things I wanted to ask you about. Can we talk about the Met Orchestra Musicians Organization that you co-founded? And did I get this right? It's a nonprofit through which Met Orchestra gives back to underserved communities in and around New York City through storytelling, relevant arts programming, and community-based collaboration. So what does that actually look like? Can you give us a snapshot of the types of outreach or civic impact that you're having around New York?
So we founded that in 2014. It is a nonprofit, a 501c3. And basically that's an IRS federal designation, which means that we can accept donations and that donation is tax deductible for the donor. Which is different from like a GoFundMe, for example. So that's the way all nonprofits are in this country. And we were looking for a vehicle through which we could actually connect with the community. So this is that community impact conversation we were just having. There was a lot of opinion in the orchestra at the time that, we wanted to actually be a part of which was called outreach at the time. And the Met wasn't involving us in that. So what we did was kind of create this it's its own entity, but Peter Gelb, our general manager, was okay with it. And so the Met Opera is sort of like our umbrella parent. And we wanted to, for example, we did like quartet concerts in library in the Bronx, and Peter and the Wolf, and all kinds of like smaller community type events that came to us. The nonprofit has since then kind of grown into a different kind of nonprofit through which it actually just fundraises for the orchestra now. And we did that during COVID so that we could provide grants to people who were financially suffering. And so it's a little bit different now. Of course, we do all of those same outreach things. And we even brought that idea to the Met, in that we said, people, you have all of this human content and it's really valuable to your audience. So use us. And in 2018, we actually knew they needed these intimate experiences for their audience members. And we offered just the option for them to ask for people to do a meet and greet with young board members, for example, and everybody is doing this. We just weren't. So we offered them volunteer hours. And as a result, they took a wage cut off the table. So it was in exchange for money, but the reason why I say that is because there is that community outreach and engagement and impact that does need to happen inside your organization too, and that's the belonging part of it. And so we believed that it was really a holistic thing. It was outside the building, inside the building, and we wanted to have a voice. The Met has their flashy pictures and ads, and that at the time we just thought boring. We wanted to be more innovative. And so we created all kinds of awesome content, and it really took off. And I think it provided a blueprint for other organizations to do the same. We certainly got a lot of guidance from Minnesota and their lockout. And I have to be very honest that founding that nonprofit, Met Orchestra Musicians, was self-serving too, in that having your community know you is a point of leverage in negotiations. So, and that we wanted to do that too. And so we talked to politicians, and we were in New York City. We talked to the mayor. We knew all of our council members, and that was all part of the negotiating process. And my political science background absolutely informs my negotiating. And I think all musicians are terrified of negotiations. The first word that you think of is conflict, and, it's going to be contentious. And the reality is that the old school way of doing negotiations that are very contentious, where we're locking somebody out or we're going to go on strike, that happens, sure, in moments of great upheaval and turmoil in an organization, that the organization may decide, like the Met did in 2014, we're going to lock you out. They were incredibly financially in trouble, but for reasons that we argued over. And so when that happens, there is a lot of trauma to anything, right? Sports organizations, Major League Baseball just settled. But what science tells us, and behavioral psychology, and I'm a huge, huge fan of Daniel Kahneman, that in the long term, it's better to be collaborative. And so after going through this hugely traumatic negotiation in 2014, we started to relationship build throughout 2014 to 2018. And so when we came back to the table in 2018, it was a very different negotiation where we were collaborating. We allowed Sundays in exchange for a retirement pension increase. We did a bunch of different things, but we were willing to work collaboratively in order for everybody to come out better. And I think that's the biggest thing that my students I've spent more time talking about is what is conflict, and like conflict styles, and how we are either avoiding or competing or collaborating, or we're trying to reach consensus, or compromising. And compromising to me in a negotiation is like the worst thing ever, because you don't really solve a problem and nobody gets what they want. So the collaboration part of it in the long run is really the best. And I think that labor side, like musicians, need to understand that more as they go into the future. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but that's why I want to rebrand unions, because I think we're all a little bit like, oh, union is a yucky word and a yucky thing. But New York unions are really strong. The musicians union is really strong. And so they supported all of our negotiations, and they supported our nonprofit founding. They provided us with a lawyer to get it done. So, I mean, there was a lot of support in that process from the union that we would have never had otherwise.
Listener, it's worth mentioning, if you're not aware, that what Jessica's talking about right now are musicians just like you going to the table and performing the actual negotiations with the administration. Musicians are not professional negotiators. We are not lawyers. We do not have the communication skills inherent in that job, yet that is part of our role. And I've always found that to be so insane. And I'll give a shout out to my colleagues in the LA Phil, our negotiating committee and our orchestra committee, the things that they have done, which are unpaid volunteer hours, and a lot of them, especially during the pandemic, that they can actually walk away with contracts that leave both sides feeling really good about everything is incredible to me. If you ever needed proof, musicians, that you are capable of doing more than just play, look at your orchestra committees and look at the type of work that you're talking about right here. So you mentioned 2014 a few times, and that was a rough year for the Met when Peter Gelb, your director, mentioned that you were going to be going bankrupt. How did that impact you as a musician, having to show up and go to work, or just as a human being? Was it impossibly difficult to compartmentalize that? How did it impact your daily job?
When something like that happens, the anger and the demoralization of the organization is so palpable. And, I might be one of the few people in the building that doesn't hate Peter Gelb because I can understand, I think, what he was trying to do and the board. And he certainly had his hand tied in many ways by the board. But doing that kind of hardball tactic really burns bridges. And I don't know that sometimes, in organizations that ever really fully gets repaired. People become incredibly angry. And it's also a way to unify everybody against you, which is kind of what happened in 2014, in that all the unions started to work together. And that unity, that solidarity was incredibly strong. In fact, like the Teamsters were with us, and, political officials were with us, and we got the New York Times editorial board to publish on the day of the end of the contract to say, don't lock them out, just keep talking. And it's absolutely true. I became chair in February, 2 weeks before we started negotiations, because our chair won a job in another orchestra. So I had no idea, we had an amazing committee of former chairs that just didn't want to do it this time. And the legacy and the institutional memory of what we do, why we have these contractual rules, why we fought for them in the first place, why they're important to our health and our sanity, that was really helpful to me. It was an incredibly contentious negotiation. It took hours and hours and hours and hours. And it is unpaid, and I think, the orchestra gave us like all a bottle of wine and a gift card at the end. And it was like, you have no idea the trauma, the therapy, and then like the chair people that I know now, there's an experience that you've gone through of just holding the weight of the orchestra on your shoulders, trying to figure out how to get 100 people with like many different opinions to march in one direction. So in some ways, when you have a hardball tactic, it's easier to get people to march in the same direction, even though they're angry. The angry, group that's focused on one thing is very useful. In 2018, it's a little bit more difficult when you're trying to do different things, but everybody's got an opinion about it. And musicians are incredibly opinionated, as you know, and for the reasons that you said earlier, we again, the union provided lawyers. We pay some amount of money, a partial payment to a lawyer, and we've had incredible lawyers too. And so a lot of people think like, oh, I don't know how to negotiate. Like, I don't know what to do at the table. It's like, well, you're not going to do the talking. I'm going to do the talking, and the lawyer's going to do the talking, and the president of your union is going to do the talking. But if you're not a person who wants to be on, for example, your social media committee because you don't know how to do a reel, maybe you're actually really good at reading a contract and you want to be on your committee. That's civic impact. And you're there to represent your 10, people of your orchestra that talk to you and say, hey, what about this? Like, how come we're not doing this? Or their concerns. And that's the way that you understand the organism of the orchestra, to know what their priorities are. Obviously, there's a lot more involved in that in terms of surveying people, but you're there to represent their needs and their interests as the committee. You're not necessarily going to say anything, but you're at the table. And those people just sat through all of these horrible negotiations, and like Peter Gelb and I screaming at each other, but then they don't get to have the reconciliation dinner, which I got to have. And so that's why Peter and I have actually a pretty good relationship. But other people didn't get to heal that trauma. And that's where in the long run, in game theory, when if you have the prisoner's dilemma, if your theory with that, like selling somebody out of those kinds of hardball tactics and negotiations work in the short term, because you may be able to break the union or break whatever is happening. But in the long run, that kind of trauma to an organization is not useful. At the end of the day, you all have to go back to work together.
I'm especially remembering reading something in the New York Times about all-night bargaining sessions and how it was very public negotiation. And you're talking about healing relationships. Your public and your patrons are paying attention to what's going on as well. It's really unusual how front-facing that negotiation was in New York. I think it was precedent setting too. I'm going to just have two more questions for you to wrap up here. And this might be a big one, but I asked you what your thoughts were on the future of the classical music business, and you wrote, "Ha!" with an exclamation point. And I thought, I want to just talk about that for a second, because I think it's a really difficult question to answer, but I'm really curious what your perspective is with such an evolution in digital consumption of music and streaming and the pandemic and the financial challenges facing arts organizations. Where do you see this whole thing going? Like, what does the future look like for people who are just getting into this profession? And what are one or two things that they need to know?
Yes, that is the question, right? And actually, I've had this conversation with Aubrey Bergauer a lot. The digital piece was a question even before COVID. So we as musicians have held digital media very tightly as a piece of value, recordings and media and broadcasting and streaming, which was very profitable during COVID because a lot of orchestra members, and I'm speaking specifically about orchestra at this moment in time, but a lot of orchestras kept getting paid because they were able to use archival content that then, they were like, okay, we're paying you for this content again. And so the digital piece was really important. It kept organizations open online. The other thing that it did was, in marketing speak, it meant that people were spending more time on organizations' website, which was a change. If you are interested in this at all, listeners, Colleen Dillon Schneider, Know Your Own Bone, her blog is incredible. She works at Impacts, which is a marketing research survey company, and they do all kinds of marketing research. And it'll blow your mind. There's so much information on her blog. And one of her recent blog posts was about the fact that this is a new change, that organizations got people to come to their website for the first time. Normally people go to the website to buy tickets or get information, but they'll consume the digital content on social media. And that flipped. So the question is, will that stay? And we don't know yet, but the consumption of digital media is there. And I think it's out there. And the question is, how do musicians want to capitalize on it? And I think that's what we were talking about earlier. We all have some value to bring, some story, some piece of unique quality of this person or that person, one person who's like an amazing knitter, and that's a story, and you post it and it does really well. Or talking about I squeaked twice in Don Carlos talking about perfectionism, and no, I'm not a clarinet beginner, and I had no idea why it happened, and we're all laughing. So that kind of story, it's authentic. And I think those authentic stories are interesting to audiences. It makes us accessible, and it makes those people who might not know about art think that they could belong in our concert halls. And that's really the most important thing. So we're in this incredible time right now where we need to be representing our full society. So, that opens up a whole different range. Again, that three-dimensional box of things that we should and can, and it's pretty awesome to do. Terrence Blanchard is incredible. It was just so fun to do that opera and meet him and have him there, and just he's the nicest guy in the universe. And the story was so powerful. And the story of Charles Blow is just a human story. And I think that's what people want. So the future is, I think connecting with people, like you said, that is our job. And I think we have to do it more proactively. I think we have to think outside of our boxes. I think we can't afford to be complicit and sit on our laurels of our conservatory degrees. We really do. You need to be doing something. And I believe that not in a wagging my finger at you way, but like you'll be happier too, right? You'll be a happier person. You'll be more fulfilled. You'll be less angry about this maestro's interpretation of Tchaikovsky and more fulfilled in your life. So that's to me is the future, is where I also fit into that is specifically that entrepreneurship piece for students, because I do think that they don't have the tools or the skills to do some of that. And certainly my colleagues had to learn it. We didn't all have it. So we were reading, Tom Wolfe's book on how to manage a nonprofit. We didn't know anything. So what I'm trying to do is provide that information, pass it along, so that this new generation coming up, they're going to bring something even more beautiful, I think, because they are not interested in the old elite ideas at all, right? They are going to break that apart. And I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to get them into these orchestras where they're going to create change and catalysts, the catalyst of like change, because of their like, what are you, questioning everything. They don't understand it. It's not logical to them. So the change is them, quite frankly.
As inspired as I am by the work that you and your colleagues do in the Met, I am so incredibly fired up by this portion of the work that you're doing. And a shout out to Aubrey Bergauer and others like her. This is so important. It is so satisfying. It is the future of our industry, and there's no better time than right now to step in and start asking yourself, what can I do to contribute to this? How can I break those paradigms? Jessica, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I think we could talk for 2 more hours. Where can people connect with you? Speaking of connection, are you doing master classes? What else can they find? Where can we find you online as well?
You can find me at my website, which is jessicaphillipsclarinet.com. And you can email me through that website. I'm on social media, which are all accessible through my website. I just did a masterclass at University of Alabama, and it was like, I was thinking, wow, I've tried to go there twice in the past 5 years and been snowed out both times. And so it's like, well, I'm finally here because the pandemic made Zoom masterclasses possible, which, for all of the barriers of technology in terms of sound and really kind of being there, at least you're there, at least you're making some connections and talking to students. And so I do think that's a really neat byproduct. If we had to look at a silver lining, I do love that even though our world is small, it's smaller through the Zoom, which we all hate, but we can reach out to broader people. So don't hesitate to reach out. I love talking to people. I met so many people during the pandemic that I would never have been able to meet because, the Met season's crazy. So it's something that fires me up. It keeps me going. And yeah, I think it's a big wide world out there. So anyway, yes, that's how you can access me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for spending time chatting with me today. I know my listeners are going to love this episode, and hopefully I'll get to see you in New York at some point. And hey, if you're bored, the LA Phil is about to start contract negotiations. So if you want to pop on over and hop on the table, I'm sure we'd appreciate it.
I actually kind of really like negotiating. Like as weird as that sounds, like I actually like it. So yeah, if you guys need anybody to help out, call me.
All right, I'll mention it tonight at work. Jessica, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye. Big thanks to Jessica Phillips for taking some of her not underground in an opera pit time to hang out here on the podcast. And I hope you take her challenge to heart, especially if you're just starting out in your career, to go out and challenge the old elite ideas that have had such a limiting impact on our industry. Who knows? Maybe someone listening to this podcast right now will be the next brilliant negotiator for the Metropolitan Opera. Okay, that's it for me today. This has been the Honesty Pill Podcast, episode 33. You can learn more at honestypill.com. And I want to thank those of you who have taken a moment to leave a review of this podcast. It means the world to us and helps other people just like you connect with everything that is going on over here at Honesty Pill. And if you haven't subscribed and you like what you're hearing, I want to challenge you to check this item off your to-do list by subscribing right now wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, I'm out of here. Thanks for listening. See you next time.